you'll see that everyone bows and curtsies to the king, and no one moves a limb, a muscle, when Camilla passes. And not only that, Kate and William were angry too.
Camilla in tears after the royal council named Princess Catherine as queen. That is the extraordinary development emerging tonight from Geneva, Switzerland. In an unprecedented session, the Global Royal Council has confirmed Catherine, Princess of Wales, as the appointed future monarch, citing a sealed directive from the late Queen Elizabeth II. The decision has shaken the monarchy, ignited debate across the Commonwealth, and left Queen Camilla visibly devastated. The council's meeting, normally a ceremonial reaffirmation of tradition, became the stage for one of the most dramatic turns in recent royal history. Delegates representing Commonwealth nations assembled in the Palais d'Yon under conditions of strict secrecy. The expectation was routine, discussions on unity, stability, and continuity. But rumors had already spread in diplomatic circles. This gathering would not follow the script. According to council officials, the session took a decisive turn when a cream-coloured envelope, stamped with the royal cipher of Queen Elizabeth II, was presented to the chair. Carried in by a white-gloved attendant, the document immediately silenced the chamber. Witnesses describe an atmosphere so tense that even the sound of footsteps echoed like thunder. The envelope was opened by Dr. Alistair Finch, the council's chief archivist, who announced that its contents carried historic weight. Breaking the wax seal, he began to read. What followed, observers say, was nothing short of a revelation. The directive, written in Elizabeth's own hand during the later years of her reign, contained contingency instructions for moments of crisis. Its language was personal and deliberate. It stated that in the event of a rupture of unity or legitimacy, the crown should be entrusted not to custom, not to procedure, but directly to Catherine, Princess of Wales. Delegates gasped. The silence that followed was heavier than the vaulted ceilings above them. For the first time, the monarchy's future had been explicitly tied to Catherine by Elizabeth herself. According to analysts, the directive was a thunderclap, a decisive judgment from beyond the grave. Catherine's reaction was measured. Seated at the head of the right-hand table, a placement reserved for figures considered essential to the crown's future, she remained calm, her hands folded, her gaze steady. No smile, no gesture of triumph, only composure. Witnesses describe her demeanor as unshaken, almost regal. Camilla's reaction told a different story. Though she remained still, observers noted a visible tightening of her jaw, her lips pressed into a hard line. For years, she had fought to secure legitimacy, enduring relentless comparisons to her late predecessor. Now, in a single document, she had been bypassed. Symbolism compounded the blow. Seating arrangements at the start of the session had already sent subtle signals. Catherine was placed in a position of prominence. Camilla, though seated in the front row, was positioned to the left, a detail small enough to be dismissed, yet significant enough to be interpreted as relegation. In a chamber where every gesture is symbolic, one diplomat remarked, seating is never accidental. The directive's implications were clear. Though the legal line of succession remains unchanged, the council had been asked to recognize Catherine as the stabilizing figure for the monarchy's future. This was not simply symbolic, it was a direct instruction from Elizabeth II, a monarch whose word still resonates across the Commonwealth. Experts in constitutional affairs immediately labelled the moment historic. This is the most significant intervention by a late monarch in modern memory, one analyst commented. Elizabeth not only shaped her reign, but has reached into the future to secure the crown through Catherine. The atmosphere in the chamber grew dense. Delegates, many of them seasoned in the art of protocol, leaned forward as if not to miss a single word. The weight of the document was undeniable. Every line reinforced Catherine's role as the monarchy's safeguard. Every line reminded Camilla of what she had not been entrusted with. Witnesses described the tension between the two women as palpable. Catherine's serene composure contrasted sharply with Camilla's rigid stillness. Observers say the contrast was itself a narrative, the calm of continuity versus the fury of rejection. At this stage, the council chair announced that the directive would require a formal vote of endorsement. Delegates, bound by ancient rules of procedure, would have to declare their positions openly. The decision would no longer be hidden in archives. It would be confirmed or denied in the eyes of history. For Catherine, the moment was transformative. She had not sought the spotlight in Geneva, yet Elizabeth's words had placed her at the center of it. In one reading, she had become more than the wife of a future king. She had become the designated protector of the crown. For Camilla, the humiliation was profound. Those close to her report that she clutched the arms of her chair so tightly that her knuckles whitened. Every diplomat in the room, every aide in attendance, could see the personal sting. Analysts later described it as a public rupture, the moment when private rivalries spilled into the open. The council, however, had no choice but to proceed. The directive had been revealed, the vote prepared. Geneva was no longer hosting a ceremonial reaffirmation of tradition. It was hosting the rewriting of royal reality. As preparations for the ballot began, aides rushed to secure communication lines. Some discreetly alerted London, others hurried to prepare statements for the media. It was already clear that once the news reached the outside world, the monarchy would be facing not just headlines but a storm. The stage was set. Catherine sat calmly, waiting. Camilla, silent but seething, braced herself. The delegates, aware of the weight of their role, prepared to cast votes that would echo across history. What had begun as a quiet session of royal diplomacy was now a defining moment. The question was no longer whether Catherine would be endorsed. The question was whether the monarchy itself could withstand the shockwaves unleashed in Geneva. The vote inside the Palais de Chambert began with the solemnity of a coronation and the tension of a courtroom. Delegates, bound by centuries of procedure, were called one by one to raise their hands in support or opposition to the directive of Queen Elizabeth II. Normally such votes pass quietly, with unanimity staged for symbolism. But this was no ordinary session. Witnesses described the air as electric, every breath measured. Each delegate knew that their gesture would be recorded not as protocol, but as history. The first hand rose swiftly in favour of Catherine, Princess of Wales. Then another and another. Within minutes, the pattern became unmistakable. The chamber was coalescing around Catherine. Analysts later said that the outcome reflected years of quiet diplomacy. Catherine's reputation had been built steadily through engagements abroad, consistent public approval, and an image of calm authority. Observers say Catherine's composure in that moment was striking. She did not smile or look around the room. Instead, she sat with folded hands, acknowledging each declaration with the smallest of nods. In a chamber where restraint is the highest form of power, her stillness spoke louder than words. Camilla's reaction was in stark contrast. Though she remained seated, her posture betrayed the strain. Witnesses noted her lips pressed thin, her jaw clenched, her eyes fixed unblinkingly forward. Every raised hand in Catherine's favour was, in effect, a rejection of her. It was like watching legitimacy slip away in real time, one delegate remarked. As the roll call continued, only one dissenting vote emerged, a symbolic act of loyalty to Camilla. The overwhelming majority sided with Catherine. When the final name was called, the council chair stood and declared the result. His words carried the authority of tradition, but the gravity of disruption. By the authority of the Global Royal Council, Princess Catherine shall be recognized as the appointed future monarch. The statement, delivered in calm tones, reverberated like a thunderclap. For several moments, the chamber was silent. Then applause began, measured, deliberate, and undeniable. Delegates rose to their feet, acknowledging not just Catherine, but the legacy of Elizabeth II that had guided the decision. Catherine rose slowly to respond. Her words were brief, carefully chosen. She thanked the council for their confidence, pledged her commitment to duty, and promised to preserve the monarchy's stability for future generations. She invoked the memory of Elizabeth, calling her directive an act of foresight designed to protect unity. Witnesses described the address as clear, steady, and free of triumph. And it was a performance of restraint, designed to reinforce legitimacy without provoking confrontation. Yet even in her calmness, the symbolism was undeniable. Catherine had emerged as the face of continuity. Across the chamber, Camilla's silence became its own statement. Those seated nearby reported an almost tangible aura of tension around her chair. She remained still, but her fingers tightened against the armrests, her breathing controlled but sharp. Then came the moment that turned a historic proclamation into a global spectacle. Without warning, Camilla pushed back her chair. The screech of wood against polished marble cut through the applause. The sound was described by witnesses as louder than the declaration itself, a rupture in protocol so sudden that the chamber froze. Camilla stood abruptly. She did not speak. She did not look at Catherine. With swift, deliberate steps, she walked out of the chamber. Her heels struck the marble floor like gunfire, echoing through the vaulted hall. Gasps followed her exit. Diplomats exchanged uneasy glances, aware that her departure was more than symbolic. It was defiance. Observers said the silence that followed was heavier than any applause. Catherine remained seated, her expression unchanged. She did not react, did not glance toward the door, and did not allow the moment to disrupt her composure. In the eyes of many, that calm became the image of authority. Behind the scenes, aides rushed to action. Some followed Camilla immediately, others made hurried phone calls. At least one aide slipped out of a side door, reportedly to alert King Charles before news reached him through leaks. And leaks were inevitable. Though the council maintained its tradition of confidentiality, cameras placed discreetly around the hall had captured the walkout. Multiple angles showed Catherine standing with dignity as Camilla exited in protest. Officials admitted privately that the images could not be contained. Within hours, they would circulate, shaping the narrative worldwide. Analysts wasted no time. Commentators described the walkout as the most visible rupture of royal unity in decades. One correspondent called it an earthquake for the monarchy, with shockwaves felt in every Commonwealth capital. Another observed that the contrast between Catherine's composure and Camilla's defiance will frame the monarchy's image for years to come. What began as a formal vote had ended as public theatre. Catherine's endorsement was now official, backed by the authority of Elizabeth II's directive and the council's near-unanimous approval. Camilla's protest was equally official, an act of rejection witnessed by the world. For the monarchy, the challenge was immediate and profound. The crown had gained a symbol of stability in Catherine, but at the cost of exposing division at its highest level. This is not only succession politics, one analyst warned. This is identity, and identity crises are the hardest to contain. As delegates filed out of the chamber, many were already preparing for the fallout. Statements would need to be issued, alliances reinforced, and the king himself consulted. Geneva had given the monarchy a new face for the future, but it had also revealed the fractures beneath the surface. For Catherine, the session ended with dignity intact. For Camilla, it ended with footsteps echoing through marble halls. And for the monarchy, it ended with a question: could the institution survive the storm it had just unleashed? As the council chamber emptied and applause for Catherine faded, the real battle shifted behind closed doors. Two parallel meetings unfolded within the same building, one framed by outrage, the other by restraint. Upstairs, Queen Camilla entered a secured suite surrounded by her closest advisors. Witnesses described the atmosphere as volatile. Voices were raised, blame was exchanged. Senior aides scrambled to explain how the council's endorsement of Catherine had been allowed to pass so decisively. Some claimed they were blindsided by the sudden revelation of Queen Elizabeth II's directive. Others admitted Catherine had quietly built alliances across the Commonwealth for years, leaving Camilla's camp unprepared for the scale of support. Camilla, at first silent, listened to the chaos, but her response was sharp and deliberate. She declared the decision unacceptable and vowed to fight back. According to insiders, she instructed her team to move immediately. The council's proclamation might not be reversible, but its legitimacy could be questioned. Phones were placed on the table. Calls were made to sympathetic figures in Parliament. Messages were sent in coded form to Commonwealth capitals. Trusted journalists received leaks framing the vote as reckless and destabilizing. The narrative, Camilla insisted, must not be allowed to settle. She would not accept humiliation without resistance. At the same time, in another quiet chamber, Catherine met with a smaller circle of delegates who had backed her. The mood was measured. There was no celebration, only calculation. Catherine thanked them for their support and listened intently to their advice. Her strategy was different from Camilla's. Rather than push headlines, she sought to consolidate the council's decision, securing commitments that would hold against any challenge. Observers note that Catherine's calm approach resonated with her supporters. "She didn't speak of victory," one delegate later said. "She spoke of duty." That tone made us more certain in our choice. By the time she left the room, Catherine had gained verbal assurances from several key representatives that they would stand by her publicly, no matter what counter-offensive emerged. Meanwhile, King Charles was receiving the news in a manner befitting the gravity of the moment, discreetly, through a confidential memo handed to him during another engagement. Those present said he remained silent for several minutes, his face impassive. But sources close to the monarch confirmed the weight of the revelation. For Charles, the dilemma was deeply personal and profoundly political. He had spent decades defending Camilla, insisting on her role as queen consort, despite criticism and controversy. To see her walk out of the council chamber in protest was already painful. To know that Catherine had been elevated by Elizabeth's directive, endorsed by the Commonwealth, was devastating. Advisers convened with him in private that evening. Opinions diverged sharply. Some urged defiance, stand by the Queen Consort, reject the Council's authority, and protect the monarchy's internal dignity. Others counselled pragmatism. Accept the decision, avoid open confrontation, and preserve the unity of the Commonwealth. One senior adviser was blunt. "Majesty, this is not about pride. This is about survival. The Commonwealth has spoken. To resist now would be to weaken the very institution you swore to protect." The king, according to palace insiders, spent the night in deep reflection. Accounts describe him pacing his study, often pausing at his desk, where Elizabeth's directive now lay unfolded. The late Queen's handwriting, steady and unmistakable, carried with it the authority of 7 decades on the throne. It was not merely a document, it was her vision for continuity. The conflict was stark. To defend Camilla was to risk appearing divided against the Commonwealth. To support Catherine was to strain his marriage at its core. Between the woman he had chosen and the institution he had inherited, Charles now faced an impossible choice. By dawn, it was evident that the decision was no longer his alone to shape. Geneva had set the course. His role was to manage the consequences. To reject the council would fracture the Commonwealth. To embrace it would redefine his own household. Neither option offered peace, only survival. Meanwhile, the world outside Geneva was already responding. International headlines declared Catherine the future queen. Television broadcasts replayed the footage of Camilla's walkout, contrasting it with Catherine's calm. Analysts debated the symbolism. One woman left in protest, one commentator said. The other stayed in silence, and that silence carried more authority than words. Public opinion, early polls suggested, leaned toward Catherine. Approval ratings for her role surged, while questions about Camilla's position grew louder. Media outlets spoke of a monarchy at a crossroads, caught between tradition and transition. Inside Buckingham Palace, however, the mood was far less celebratory. Camilla, according to aides, was determined to resist through political channels and press influence. Catherine remained silent in public, but firm in private, and Charles prepared for a statement that could define his reign, not as a monarch of ceremony, but as one forced to navigate crisis. The Geneva summit had ended, but the battle for the monarchy's image had only begun. The day after Geneva, all eyes turned to Buckingham Palace. The global royal council had spoken. Catherine, Princess of Wales, was officially endorsed as the appointed future monarch, but the proclamation was incomplete without the king's response. The question dominating every headline was clear. How would Charles react to a decision that elevated his daughter-in-law while leaving his wife in open defiance? The palace had little time. Images of Catherine receiving the council's confidence were already circulating worldwide. So too were the clips of Camilla walking out, her footsteps echoing through marble halls. News anchors described the moment as a rupture in royal unity, and commentators demanded clarification from the monarchy itself. Inside the palace, advisers pressed the king to act quickly. To remain silent was to risk appearing paralyzed. To resist was to risk alienating the Commonwealth. The pressure was immense. Charles understood that the stability of the institution was on the line. In the early afternoon, the king appeared before cameras. Flanked by senior courtiers, he delivered a speech carefully crafted to balance loyalty with necessity. His tone was measured, his words chosen with precision. He began by acknowledging Camilla, praising her years of dedication and service to the monarchy. He described her as steadfast, loyal, and essential to his reign. The language was warm enough to shield her from outright humiliation, but restrained enough not to contradict the council's decision. Then came the pivotal moment. With deliberate clarity, Charles declared his acceptance of the council's proclamation. He framed it not as a loss for his wife, but as a step for the monarchy as a whole. "The Commonwealth has spoken with unity," he said. "In honoring this decision, we honor the legacy of my late mother, and we safeguard the continuity of the crown." The king's statement was received as both personal and historic. Analysts observed that Charles had effectively endorsed Catherine as future queen, even while standing beside a consort wounded by rejection. It was, as one correspondent put it, an act of survival dressed in diplomacy. Catherine's response was equally deliberate. In her first public remarks after the king's statement, she expressed gratitude to both the council and the monarch. She emphasized service, duty, and accountability, framing her role as one of guardianship rather than ambition. "I accept this responsibility with humility," she said, "and with a solemn vow to preserve the values of the crown." Her tone reinforced the narrative that had already taken hold. Catherine as the calm, steady figure chosen by Elizabeth II to embody stability. Camilla stood alongside Charles during the address. Her posture was flawless, her expression subdued. To the cameras, she appeared the dignified queen consort, supporting her husband in a moment of gravity. But those familiar with her noticed the flicker of pain in her eyes, the tension behind her stillness. For Camilla, the public scene could not erase the private reality. She had been passed over by Elizabeth's hand and by the council's vote. The global response was immediate. Newspapers hailed Catherine as the future Queen of Unity. Editorials praised Charles for acting pragmatically, even if under duress. Approval ratings for the monarchy surged, driven largely by support for Catherine's role. Yet behind the praise, analysts warned that the peace was fragile. "What we have seen is not reconciliation," one expert noted. "It is a ceasefire, forged out of necessity." Diplomatic observers pointed to the images broadcast worldwide. Catherine and Camilla leaving the palace side by side, walking in unison but without a single glance exchanged. Their silence spoke volumes. No smiles, no whispered words, only two figures bound by obligation, yet divided by circumstance. For many, the symbolism was unmistakable. Catherine now stood at the center of the monarchy's future, her legitimacy anchored by Elizabeth's directive and the council's endorsement. Camilla remained by the king's side, but her authority was fractured. The contrast between the two women had become the story. In Commonwealth capitals, reactions varied. Some leaders welcomed Catherine's new role, describing her as a bridge between tradition and modernity. Others expressed concern about the constitutional implications, warning that the council's move could strain established norms. Still, the momentum favoured Catherine. Her image as a unifying figure had been solidified on the international stage. For Charles, the ordeal underscored the precarious balance of kingship. In a single week, he had been forced to navigate between loyalty to his wife and obedience to his mother's legacy, between personal pain and institutional duty. His decision to endorse Catherine may have preserved unity for now, but it had also exposed the deep fractures within his household. As the world absorbed the images and words from London, one reality became unavoidable. The monarchy had entered a new phase, its future tied not only to the king and his heir, but unmistakably to Catherine. And behind the calm of official statements, another reality lingered. Camilla, outwardly composed, had not surrendered. Her allies remained active, her counter-narratives already circulating. The battle for the monarchy's image was far from over. The Geneva summit may have concluded, but its shockwaves continue to reverberate across the globe. In less than a week, the monarchy has been reshaped by a single directive from the late Queen Elizabeth II, a near-unanimous vote of the Global Royal Council, and a dramatic walkout by Queen Camilla. The result has been hailed as historic, yet the aftermath suggests that this story is far from over. International reaction has been swift. In London, major newspapers splashed the words "Catherine chosen" across their front pages. Broadcasters replayed the footage of the council chamber. Catherine standing poised as the proclamation was read, followed by Camilla's abrupt departure. The images, captured by discreet cameras, have already been described as some of the defining visuals of modern royal history. In Commonwealth capitals, the responses reflected both enthusiasm and unease. Leaders in Canada and Australia praised Catherine's designation, framing it as a sign of continuity. Commentators in New Zealand pointed out her popularity among younger generations. But in Caribbean nations, where Republican movements have been gaining momentum, the Council's decision was met with skepticism. Some officials questioned whether such a directive, issued outside of British law, should influence their constitutional arrangements. Diplomatic experts say the contrast is striking. Catherine is now viewed internationally as the face of modern monarchy, while Camilla's role has become more uncertain. One figure embodies renewal, a former ambassador observed. The other represents resilience but also resistance. The monarchy is caught between them. Within the United Kingdom, public sentiment has shifted dramatically. Polls conducted in the days following Geneva show a surge of approval for Catherine. Her calm demeanour during the council session and her understated speech afterward have strengthened her image as a leader in waiting. Analysts note that the symbolism of Elizabeth II's directive carries enormous weight with the public, framing Catherine not as a usurper, but as the chosen guardian of the crown. Camilla's image, however, has suffered. The walkout, while a personal act of protest, has been interpreted by many as defiance against both Elizabeth's legacy and the Commonwealth. Headlines described it as an act of pride, a rupture in protocol, and the Queen Consort's most visible defeat. Yet among her supporters, the act has been defended as a stand for dignity. Sympathetic newspapers argue that Camilla was unfairly sidelined, her decades of loyalty ignored in favour of a symbolic gesture from the past. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere remains tense. Insiders confirm that Camilla continues to hold private meetings with advisors, determined to influence public opinion. Communications with political allies and journalists have not ceased. According to sources, her strategy now focuses on framing the council's action as advisory, not binding, suggesting that the monarchy should ultimately be guided by Parliament and the Crown itself, not by a Geneva Assembly. Catherine, by contrast, has adopted a quieter approach. Her schedule remains filled with engagements, yet every appearance carries new significance. Crowds greet her with greater enthusiasm. Diplomats treat her with increased respect. And though she avoids direct comment on Geneva, her presence alone is interpreted as a reminder of the Council's decision. She doesn't need to speak of it, one analyst remarked. Her silence confirms her legitimacy. King Charles remains the central figure navigating the divide. His speech endorsing Catherine's role while praising Camilla was widely praised as pragmatic. But palace insiders admit the king has been deeply unsettled. Those close to him describe long hours of reflection, his desk still occupied by the directive written by Elizabeth II. For Charles, the conflict between personal loyalty and institutional duty has not eased. The monarchy's approval ratings may have risen in the short term, but experts caution that unity is fragile. What we are witnessing is not a resolution, a constitutional scholar explained. It is a temporary alignment of necessity. The underlying tensions remain unresolved. Indeed, the images from London speak volumes. Following the king's speech, Catherine and Camilla were seen leaving side by side. Their steps matched, their faces composed, but their eyes never met. The silence between them conveyed a reality no statement could conceal. This was coexistence, not reconciliation. Across the world, commentators have seized on the symbolism. Two women, walking together but apart. One broadcast noted, "Bound by the crown, divided by destiny." As the dust settles, the broader implications are becoming clear. The monarchy has entered a new phase, where Catherine is no longer simply the wife of a future king, but a designated figure of stability. Elizabeth's directive ensured her place in history. The council's vote gave it legitimacy. The king's endorsement made it official, but the human cost, the fracture between Catherine and Camilla, remains unresolved. Analysts warn that Camilla's quiet resistance may yet grow louder. With her network of allies in Parliament, the press, and certain Commonwealth capitals, she retains influence. Camilla is not defeated, one commentator cautioned. She has retreated to a different battlefield. At the same time, Catherine's rise brings new expectations. Her role is no longer symbolic, it is practical. She is expected to act as the unifying face of the monarchy, to embody the legacy of Elizabeth, and to prepare for the future with William by her side. Every appearance, every word, will now be judged through the lens of Geneva. The global narrative is clear. Geneva was not just another royal meeting, it was a turning point. A sealed letter written decades ago has reshaped the monarchy, placing Catherine at the heart of its future. The council's vote confirmed her legitimacy. Camilla's walkout revealed the cost. For the monarchy, the challenge is survival. For Charles, it is balance. For Catherine, it is responsibility. And for Camilla, it is resistance. As one diplomat put it, "This was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new struggle. The crown has weathered storms before, but this storm is different. It comes from within." And so, as the world watches, the House of Windsor moves forward into uncertain waters. The Geneva summit is over. The crisis it unleashed has only just begun.